All right, get ready to dive deep because we're headed back to the arcades of 1982. You know, the year Pac-Man fever was everywhere. But something new was about to hit the scene. Something that made those pixelated screens feel a whole lot bigger. We're talking about Zaxxon, folks.
Ah, Zaxxon.
Yeah.
Now there's a name that brings back memories. You see, back then most games were flat, two-dimensional. But Zaxxon, it changed the game. They used this technique, axonometric projection. Basically, it was a way to trick your eyes into seeing 3D. And let me tell you, back then, it blew people's minds.
Yeah, it's like the difference between looking at a drawing of a building and then suddenly being able to fly through it.
Yeah.
And Zaxxon, it didn't just look different, it played different too.
Oh, absolutely. You weren't just moving left and right anymore. You had to think about your altitude, dodging obstacles coming from different heights. I read somewhere that some arcades even had to put up diagrams on the cabinets just to explain the controls. It was that groundbreaking.
Seriously, diagrams. Wow, talk about a game changer. And you know what else really blew my mind about Zaxxon? The marketing, they went all out.
I bet they did for a game like that.
It was one of the first video games to ever get a big budget TV commercial.
No way.
Yeah, and we're not talking about just some static image with a voiceover. They got the same visual effects team that worked on the movie Tron to create these incredible, mind-blowing
Yeah,
sequences.
was kidding. The folks behind Tron, that's legendary. They were pushing boundaries.
Right. Talk about ahead of their time. So they've got this amazing game, visually stunning, and they're pulling out all the stops with the marketing. What was the reaction like when it finally hit arcades?
Well, let me tell you, it was an absolute sensation. I mean, people were lining up, pockets full of quarters, just to get their shot at piloting that spaceship. Zaxxon became one of Sega's biggest arcade hits ever, and it was one of the top grossing games of that entire year.
Wow, they must have been rolling in quarters. But, beyond just the initial success, what I find really interesting is how Zaxxon influenced other games.
Oh, absolutely. It was like a catalyst for innovation.
Mm-hmm.
That isometric perspective, the way it created this illusion of depth. It didn't just disappear after Zaxxon.
Right, right.
Think about games like Q*bert or Marble Madness. They owe a lot to Zaxxon for paving the way.
Yeah, it wasn't just about the visuals either, right?
No, you're absolutely right. Zaxxon really forced game developers to rethink what was possible. Level design, gameplay, the whole 9 yards.
So it's like Zaxxon, it wasn't just a game, it was a whole new way of thinking about games.
Exactly, and that's what makes its legacy so fascinating. But, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a step back and really dig into what made that original Zaxxon so captivating. Because remember, this was a time when arcade games, they were all about simple controls. Addictive gameplay,
Pure arcade magic, right. Pure arcade magic. So how did Zaxxon manage to bottle that magic? What set it apart from all the other games vying for players' quarters?
Well, it's funny you should mention quarters because one of the things that really hooked players was how Zaxxon used its visuals to influence the gameplay. Like, remember how we talked about controlling your ship's altitude? It wasn't just about making the game look fancy.
Right, you had to actually use that third dimension to your advantage to, dodge walls and enemy fire coming from different angles.
Exactly. And here's the thing. As you changed altitude, the size of your ship's shadow on the ground would change too. Such a small detail, right?
It is, yeah. But I can see how it would make a difference.
It gave players this extra visual cue to help them judge their height and avoid crashing. I mean, they could have just had a static shadow, but that little dynamic detail, it added so much to the immersion.
It's those little touches, They really show how much thought went into every aspect of the game. Speaking of details, we can't talk about Zaxxon without mentioning that final boss battle, right? Zaxxon himself.
Oh, man. That robot overlord was the stuff of legends. And tough as nails.
I can imagine. What was the strategy there? Was there even one? Or was it just pure luck to take him down?
Well, I'd say it was a bit of both, honestly. Some players swore they'd figured out Zaxxon's attack patterns, They'd spent hours memorizing his moves, trying to find the perfect moment to strike.
I can just picture them hunched over the controls, battling it out with this digital dragon robot overlord.
Exactly. And get this, there were even rumors about a way to take Zaxxon out before he could even fire a single shot.
Whoa, wait a minute. Are you serious? A secret strategy to cheese the final boss? You have to tell me more.
Let's just say it involved some very precise timing and maybe a bit of exploiting the game's code.
Man, the lengths people would go to for those bragging rights. But that's what's so cool about these old arcade games, right? There's always something more to discover, some hidden depth just waiting to be unearthed.
You hit the nail on the head. And it wasn't just the boss battles that kept people coming back for more. The waves of enemies. each with their own quirks and attack patterns. Man, that added a whole other level of challenge.
Oh, yeah, I bet. It wasn't just about blasting everything on screen. You had to learn how each enemy behaved, how to anticipate their moves.
And don't forget about managing your fuel.
Oh, man, the fuel gauge. Talk about a constant source of anxiety.
Right. It was like this constant balancing act, blasting enemies while making sure you didn't run dry and plummet to your doom.
So many things to keep track of. It really shows how much these games demanded from players. You couldn't just zone out. You had to be fully present, fully engaged.
Absolutely. But, as much as Zaxxon was a product of the arcade, its reach extended far beyond those dimly lit spaces.
Oh, yeah. How so? Did it make its way to home consoles and computers and stuff?
Oh, you better believe it. Zaxxon was everywhere. We're talking Atari, ColecoVision, Commodore 64, even those clunky old IBM PCs that took up half your desk.
Whoa, IBM PCs. Seriously, people were playing Zaxxon on those things.
They were, although I imagine the graphics and sound were a bit different on those.
I bet. But still, it goes to show just how popular Zaxxon became. Everyone wanted a taste of that isometric action.
Exactly. And that widespread appeal. It speaks to how quickly the gaming world was evolving back then. It was a wild time, with all these different companies and platforms popping up left and right.
It must have been exhilarating to be a part of it all.
Absolutely. And Zaxxon, it was right there in the thick of it, pushing boundaries and helping to shape the future of gaming as we know it. But believe it or not, that's not even the end of the story.
Oh, there's more. You gotta be kidding. Spill the beans. What else did Zaxxon go on to inspire?
All right, so Zaxxon took the arcade world by storm, inspired a whole wave of imitators.
But Sega, they weren't done with Zaxxon just yet.
Oh. They weren't content to just rest on their laurels. What did they do next?
Well, they decided to up the ante. Naturally. Just a few months after the original Zaxxon hit the arcades, they released Super Zaxxon.
Super Zaxxon. Okay, I'm listening.
Everything you loved about the first game, faster, more intense, the graphics got an upgrade, the enemies were even more relentless.
So basically, they took the Zaxxon formula and cranked it up to 11. Exactly.
Yeah.
But they also made a pretty significant change to the final boss battle.
Really? They replaced Zaxxon himself. Who could be more intimidating than that giant robot?
Well, get this. Instead of a robot, you now faced a dragon.
A dragon. Wow, talk about a plot twist. Did Super Zaxxon manage to capture the same magic as the original?
It's tough to say. It definitely had its fans, and it did really well in the arcades. But for a lot of people, nothing could quite top the original.
There's just something special about those groundbreaking firsts, isn't there? But hey, you got to give Sega credit for trying new things.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they didn't stop there. Remember how we were just talking about all those different platforms Zaxxon appeared on?
Yeah, it seemed like it was everywhere back then.
Well, they even took Zaxxon into the third dimension.
Wait, seriously? Like actual 3D?
Actual 3D. They released Zaxxon 3D for the Sega Master System. You know those glasses with the red and blue lenses?
Oh man, the blue and red glasses. I remember those. Everything looked kind of blurry and doubled.
Yeah, that's the ones.
Wow, so Zaxxon was doing 3D before 3D was even really a thing? That's pretty wild.
Right, it was innovative for sure, but some people felt like it lost some of the charm of the original.
Yeah, sometimes those newfangled technologies, they're not always an improvement.
And as the technology evolved, so did Zaxxon. They even released a version with early polygon graphics for the Sega 32X called Zaxxon's Mother Base 2000.
Polygon graphics. Okay, now we're talking early 3D models. No more blocky pixels.
Exactly. But even with all the advancements, some argued that it lost some of the essence of what made the original Zaxxon so special.
It really makes you appreciate how those early games, even with their technical limitations, managed to capture people's imaginations so completely. There's a certain magic to that simplicity, isn't there?
There really is. But even though the technology has changed so much over the years, Zaxxon's legacy, it continues to inspire game developers even today.
Oh, I totally see that. That isometric perspective has made a huge comeback in recent years.
Absolutely. There are so many indie games out there that owe a debt to Zaxxon. It's a reminder that good game design, it's timeless.
It really is. Well, there you have it, folks. From pixelated spaceships to fire-breathing dragons to the cutting edge of early 3D graphics, Zaxxon's journey has been nothing short of remarkable.
It's a true testament to the creativity and innovation that fueled the golden age of arcade games.
Well said. And on that note, I think I'm going to go dust off my old Sega and see if I can still navigate those isometric fortresses. Until next time, game on.